Do you hear us well with this?
What?
You hear us well with this microphone and stuff, or?
I think so. Why don't you both talk? I can hear you anyway. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Luis.
Hola. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, encantado.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
the thing is that we thought we gonna do the we're gonna talk about he's an expert on Gilbert Simondon.
Yeah.
And we're gonna try to figure out some of your key concepts like semiotics and process social ontology and social kinds through the lens of Simondon and stuff like that. And by my side, because I read your translated version, I went through all of it and tried to correct some of the concepts because the person who translated it wasn't a philosopher, so there was some problems with some terminology, and I never read it, and I found some things that I wasn't agree with, or some things that I was like distant. I'm coming from psychoanalytic path. I was reading Lacan and Freudian writings and stuff like that. So my questions are going to be surrounding that kind of questions and stuff like that. So, but anyway, this is for just let you know the paths we're gonna go through. So yeah, shall we start? Yeah.
Okay. Let's start. Well, I apologize in advance for my English. It's enough. I think it's enough for meeting new people at a music festival, but not to have a discussion of this kind, no, of these kinds of concepts. But I will do my best. Well, as Juan was saying, I came from well, as you from a continental background. I'm sort of an specialist on the work of Gilbert Simondon, also Bernard Stiegler, and well, you can get some parts of the picture. I assume you can imagine. French theory, more or less. Contemporary French philosophy. Well, there's a reason I'm with Juan in this interview, and it is mostly that I think shortly after your last interview with him, I found an article by Andrea Bardin and Marco Ferrari. I don't know if you know Andrea Bardin. It's a well-known specialist on Gilbert Simondon, also in Thomas Hobbes, if I don't misremember. And in that article, they were talking about your book, Metamodernism, and well, I thought that perhaps we could make some of a joint interview with them and with you. Well, for reasons, for other reasons, or for another reasons, due to agenda, among other things, we have ended choosing to do it this way. So, well, to not postpone or to not let any more time pass, So you could say I am kind of I'm here kind of as an Simondonian ambassador or something like that. And I hope I can present their points faithfully. Well, Bardeen and Ferrari consider your book to be a methodological reflection on the epistemology of the social sciences that should be taken into account. In this sense, they welcome your proposal and simply point out some issues that are more focus related rather than objections to the text. And these issues can be summarized fundamentally in 2 points. The first point would be the problematization of the modern postmodern dialectic, leaving aside some reserves about the terms postmodern and metamodernism, which in their opinion come in large part from the biased perception of the English-speaking academy. Bardeen and Ferrari define modernism as an emancipatory tendency from theology marked by the myth of science, with capital S, as a mirror of nature. A tendency that ends up reducing reality and knowledge to stable, mathematically formalizable structures. And on the other hand, they define postmodernism less about an historical age or moment, and more like a tendency, characterized by the critique of that myth of science. There's some points in common, I think, with what you are pointing out in the book, but a type of critique that prevents the activity of reinvention of reality. A critique that is quite or auto or self-referential and we could say emasculating as a way to escape that absolutization of knowledge. And as an alternative to this, Bardeen and Ferrari think that it would be the possibility of being thetetic, saying it with your terms, without ceasing to be modern or being sufficiently modern. I think as a nod to Latour, they affirm that we have been modern enough in the sense that modernism is not only a tendency to the absolutization of knowledge, but a tendency to a continuous and technical reinvention of reality. So, with that said, and here comes my first question. How would you be a characterization of metamodernism that put the meta in parentheses? Should the prefix meta be taken in a strong sense?
Okay, great. So let me take a step back and make sure that I've understood you, and then where I think I differ from Barden and Ferrari's account of my work, and then I'll see if I can answer your question. So first, well, and thank you for, first of all, it's just a real pleasure to be able to talk to you and to both of you here. So, and I'll try not to, I do a thing where I get excited and talk really too quickly, even for native English speakers to understand me. So I'll try and avoid that here too. So I think two things. So, I very much enjoyed Barden and Ferrari's review. I liked that they described us as co-workers rather than competitors. And I really enjoyed their call for cross-disciplinary efforts to rejuvenate the contemporary academy. And I think that there was also some wonderful stuff in their emphasis on the material conditions necessary for philosophical thinking. But I'm not sure that I am, they accuse me of overdoing a modernity, post-modernity dialectic. And I think maybe perhaps that's a misunderstanding that comes from not having read the book of mine that immediately preceded this one. So in that book, The Myth of Disenchantment, Magic, Modernity, and the Birth of the Human Sciences, I argue against the very notion that there was a modern rupture, portraying it as mythical. So in this sense, I think we're actually more in agreement, not in disagreement, and arguing in particular that the putative claim to capture a particular historical moment by way of something called modernism was fraught with contradictions, that modernity is a rupture that never occurred. And then I think I'm closer to Latour in that book in that I say a version of We Have Never Been Modern, whereas their title, We Have Never Been Modern Enough, seems to me to be a reversion or something like that, or a further idealization of modernity in a way that I think elides a difference between a time period and a particular set of disciplinary and philosophical ideas and strategies. And so when I'm talking about, I'm very careful in the Metamodernism book never to talk about modernity and postmodernity, but rather to talk about postmodernism as the thing that invented its own myth that it claimed to overcome. So postmodernism, and here I'm meaning a particular philosophical movement, then pretended that in preceding eras there was a particular notion of science that was then so inflated a myth that it was easy to pull the foot out from under it. And we can see this concretely, for instance, in the construction of Francis Bacon that occurs in Horkheimer and Adorno's Dialectic of Enlightenment. That work begins with an account of Bacon, who is supposed to have discovered, and they criticize him for it, the assumption that there is a happy match between mind and world, such that the mind and the world, overlap, and that reason is capable of fully apprehending the world. But if you actually read Francis Bacon, he said actually quite the opposite. The mind is an imperfect mirror that only partially captures the world. The world is full of all these labyrinths, all these other things. It's a very implausible reading of Bacon. And it's a very odd point to hang on Bacon. It's an odd claim to hang on Bacon. And they also accuse Bacon of disenchanting nature, which is a common claim that he Entzauberung, disenchants nature. And Bacon believed in a fully vibrant and material nature. Now, it was a vibrant and material nature he also described metaphorically as putting to the rack. So he's torturing a living nature, but nature was alive and full of all these animating forces. And so in that way, insofar as Horkheimer and Adorno's works, and at least that very key text of theirs, became canonized as a postmodern classic, it projected backward a notion of modernity as despiritualization, etc. So but then you asked me about modern and putting the meta in parentheses. And what I mean to do, in a way, what's more important to me in the Metamodernism book is actually the meta, not the modern. So for me, what I'm trying to do is transcend or move beyond the categories through which we have historically come to see and describe ourselves, to show not just that postmodernism produced a myth of modernity that it claimed to overcome, but also postmodernism itself has mythic qualities built into it that can be worked through or transcended as well. So, I play with this also in the myth book quite a bit, but it's, not only is, the claim about the past as mythical is mythic, and the claim that anyone ever transcended myth is mythical, but also the claim that the solution is a return to myth is itself mythical, etc. And this is, different from what I take. Their solution is very different than what I take Bardin and Ferrari's solution to the problem to be. But anyway, a Horkheimer and company can be read as looking backward, although they probably don't mean to be read that way. Where was I going with this? So for me, what I'm interested in is meta and transcending, not modernity, but transcending modernism, and insofar as modernism functioned as an intellectual category. And there are more problems with modernism and postmodernism, because postmodernism, despite its name, mostly constructed a dialectical other it called enlightenment, not modernism. And the problem is that folks like Nietzsche, were seen as, and Marx, were seen as prime thinkers in modernism, but are harder to assimilate into an inflated notion of enlightenment, in part because the historical intellectual movement of modernism carried with it the legacy of not just the Enlightenment, but also Romanticism. And so there's always that already wrapped up in there. And postmodernism, by de-emphasizing basically everything that happened from the High French Enlightenment to the 1940s and 50s, then gets to sort of recoup silently a lot from Romanticism without admitting that it's borrowing from it. Now, all that said, I don't know, and I should apologize, I only know from Gilbert Simondon, or Gilbert, I think we say in English, Gilbert Simondon. I don't know very little. I only know what Deleuze and Latour say about him. And I'm sure that there is something Simondon has to contribute to my project. And I'm really curious what that is. But I don't think that the goal should be to claim a new universalized modern that we can then project and try and inhabit. I don't think that's hopefully that's not what Bardin and Ferrari are saying either, but that's what their title of their essay, I think, might lead one to think. Yeah.
No, I don't want. Well, I don't know if it's that what Bardin and Ferrari try to say. I think it's more like a plea of adoption of some points to your own project, more than I don't know, a definition of a kind of solution of your problem. I think the problem you are pointing out is perhaps more important for the American reception of continental philosophy than is for continental philosophy or post-continental philosophy. That I think that's their framework, so to speak. I don't think it's not that important. The categories of I talk for myself. I kind of reject the label postmodernism. Perhaps I guess that you could say that about Lyotard, but it's kind of a strange label applied to Derrida, Deleuze. Doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. I feel. But I don't know. Even the continuators. I don't know how to say that word. For one of the followers. The followers of Derrida.
Malabou.
Stigler, Malabou, were the last 10 years, 15 years, writing about the construction of the construction, in the case of Malabou, and the postmodern or postmodernism as a sort of legitimation discourse of deslegitimation.
Legitimation of the delegitimation.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it's not. I have a kind of a Deleuzian view about the problems of philosophy. I think that your solution is very clever for the context, the problematic context of the American reception, but it's. I don't think it translates good altogether for our local context. For
well, at the beginning of Metamodernism, you said something like, "I'm talking as from the perspective as a scholar and as a teacher as well in the universities on United States." You specify that kind of question because you're being surrounded by those tropes coming from Metamodernism, from a kind of postmodernism where you track it from where it comes from, and it was from literary critic, which is it's kind of an anti-authoritarian reading of texts, like because there was the Cold War, and you needed to track all the authoritarianism and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you say that, and also I'm thinking about trying to export from that saying that maybe the thing that's what we talked the last time we have a chat. It was that it has to speak to the problems. Metamodernism's the meta thing is kind of a position to assume certain problems locally. So you remember we talked about field works and try to recover that kind of investigations, try to recover that research, and try to speak the tongues of the street, trying to drop the ivory towers and go to the streets and try to find those processes, those social processes that's anchoring structures, powers, and stuff like that, right? And I think that what you are doing is not only presenting the content, but the kind of a formalism, because you say one time, many times in the book, that you're trying to get to something like a systematic system. I think that that's the term, right? And I get that from that reading. So yeah, I don't know.
yeah, and I fully agree that it yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. It's an attempt to do what I've also called, to use the English expletive, no bullshit theory, in that a lot of what we do in the academy is stuff that we're doing that's there because it sounds cool and it advances the stakes of an individual scholar's career, perhaps, but then it doesn't affect the lives of the person on the street. And this is an attempt to take philosophy to the streets. That's exactly right. And with a recognition as a kind of anti-systematic system, or a anti-foundationalist project in certain respects, recognizes that there is the importance of heterogeneity and difference rather than presuming homogeneity, and therefore it's going to look different than the ground, and philosophy is going to look necessarily different from the vantage of, for instance, the Spanish-speaking world. And I'll say very carefully, I'm grappling with the American-speaking, Anglophone-speaking world in part in that book because linguistic, A, that's my native language, but second, although I do read and speak many others, but because also the academy is heavily Anglophone. And so, as 80% of something, peer-reviewed philosophical works, I think that's the number I saw, are in English. And so, yeah, it's terrible, but it's like we're having, and I say this in full critique, that's why I'm so delighted that the book is translated into Spanish. The American language has an excessive dominance, and our warped versions of the problems, which, as Juan has accurately said, I argue, many of them aren't really in Derrida. They were in the New Criticism before Derrida. They just added Derrida's name or whatever, but then they got exported to much of the Anglophone world, and that means scholars writing in English across the globe who are then trying to publish in American journals have to address, for instance, that image of Derrida, whether they, again and again. And so that's the level of which I'm engaging in it. And I'll add that my next book, the one that's out for peer, I'm supposed to be getting it back from peer review any day now, actually. I'm doing more imminent to Foucault. And so there, I'm not just doing the American reception of Foucault, but I'm trying to get back to what Foucault, getting deep and rich into the French linguistic and historical context as well. But that was there's a trade-off, because then that Foucault doesn't look like what my American colleagues think Foucault looks like. So I have to take 2 chapters to say, here's the image, here's the dude, which is, and then that fights with a different audience. But I agree with you completely. Right. So it is, I'm trying to grapple with the globalized Anglophone image. Yeah.
But what you're trying to my second reading, I get that picture more clearly, is that you're trying to get some thinking about kind of a meta philosophy. That's why you're talking about that minimal ontology, and I try to make a space to think about how this thing called academy is going, in fact, where these human sciences are going, social sciences are going. And I think it's necessary, because we are all trying to publish in American journals of stuff that we doesn't care about, or just stuff that we we are not good at it because we don't like it, in fact. But
because you're being forced to fit into or argue against, spend a lot of time arguing against a set of assumptions, some of which are baked into the Anglophone structure of the academy, and some of which are baked into, even though Spanish and English are not so distant languages, are still, they're linguistic things that have to be worked to be overcome as well. And then there's another piece, and so all that, it tends to mean, and in the US context in particular is also heavily determined by a set of disciplinary lines that are very artificial and don't quite map elsewhere, but involve people really hard and fast defending disciplinary autonomy in ways that mean that they're often really talking past each other, even within the Anglosphere. And so that's another thing that I'm trying to do exactly as a kind of meta philosophy or meta human science or meta, project, is look up above those debates. And then with the view that I'm probably wrong about something. So that's the other thing. I know I'm a zetetic, and so for me that means a commitment to my own fallibility, because if not, then this would become its own kind of autoimmune, imperialized ideology, and we can't have that, right? So and so I imagine that there are things from your perspectives that I'm missing that could supplement it, and I love the way that anyone is finding pieces that work or don't work, or they build off on it. The other thing I wanted to say about Bardin and Ferrari's review, and maybe you can help me clarify this, because I want to tip it back to Luis and Simondon in particular too. So they seem to read my work as dividing a realm of nature from culture, but I'm really very specifically not doing that. I'm arguing that much of what people call natural, animal species, wasps, forests, whatever, has been socially constructed by sentient beings, including non-human sentient beings. And I'm very, very sensitive to not having a nature culture split. I have a notion of social kinds and social processes that includes things like dogs as social kinds, do you know what I mean? Or includes termites and horse breeds. And I argue that they're no less real, despite being the product of social construction. And I argue that humans are not the only creatures possessed of minds, but rather, we live in a world that is rich and full. You don't even have to go full-blown panpsychist to do this. If you just want to do, established biological sciences, at the very least, humans, there's almost not super easy to defeat way of defining mind that doesn't include at least some other species in the category of in-minded entities. And I extend it much, much richer than that. So, so that's not, so I don't think I'm having that nature culture separation, but maybe I'm misreading what their critique is. I mean, that's where they seem to position Simondon. And since I don't know Simondon, I can't see where, I don't know what problem he's solving exactly. And I know that when Latour went to modes of existence in his inquiry into modes of existence, he gestures to Simondon, but then Latour's different modes of existence are not very good. Like they're like, I mean, or they're the same kinds of universalizing categories that we could critique elsewhere. But I mean, my reading of that book was quick, and you know, I like the earlier Latour more than that. I really like We've Never Been Modern. That's one of my absolute favorites of Latour. Yeah, and I got something out of the ant stuff until it reached a limit. Anyway, but I'm probably missing something. So if they're saying Simondon bridges nature culture, then I totally agree. We need to bridge nature culture, and I think that the only way. But to add a little piece of self-critique before we move on, I do take the term natural kind from philosophy of science, and then I try and argue, but then I basically whittle it down to say, okay, yeah, maybe, chemical elements. Besides that, I'm not mostly using that, but that's vulnerable to critique just because that's a legacy term. But I don't mean natural as opposed to any other kinds of things. Yeah.
I think that Bardeen and Ferrari mostly are focused on the use of that distinction between natural kinds and social kinds, and the idea that the ontology, the process of ontology, it's not enough it's not enough with a social process ontology, and we need also a natural process ontology. So process ontology of everything.
Yeah, and I'm
or it's more.
Yeah.
I think they point out that divide. I don't know what use you make, or what are your confesiones, ¿cómo sería?
Yeah, confessiones,
Well,
confessions, beliefs. Yeah.
To that distinction.
Concessions.
But
yeah, I use it very, very lightly. I only say that natural kinds, as philosophers, science have historically defined them, are a mistake to apply to social kinds, because there's a lot of baggage built into the notion of natural kinds. And then I list out that kind of baggage, and I basically argue that it over reifies things. And then I say, for a range of different things, they're supposed to be definable according to necessary and sufficient conditions. They're often supposed to have microstructures, which makes them, so you can clearly, they're not supposed to be nested. Something is supposed to be only a member of one kind of blah, blah, blah. And then I say, whatever we're talking about in this social, whether or not there are any things in the world at all that count as natural kinds, of which the only thing that I say that there's a question mark maybe might be chemical elements, nothing else from not only plants, but even like, mountains don't count as natural kinds in that definition, much less, and especially also because I want to argue that, and I'm not anti using a process ontology for everything. In fact, I give some clues that I'd be even the things like chemical elements are the processes of unfolding, are the products of unfolding processes. It's just that the scale of processes on chemical elements that have brought them into being and that give them their properties are much, much grander than we as sentient entities are likely to encounter significant shifts. I don't think that, gold is going to undergo a mutation such that just something. So I think in that respect, I'm probably not disagreeing with them. And I'm not trying to make much of that distinction. I'm mostly just doing it because I want to just say that there's a huge move in social sciences to treat social kinds as if they shared the features of Aristotelian natural kinds, and that's a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they will perhaps reject a the distinction that is behind that distinction, that is the kind of the divide between hard sciences and soft sciences, and there's a kind of continuity, process continuity between natural entities and social entities.
Oh, I
Como la
completely,
definamos, o sea, sí.
Yeah, how we
yeah,
define.
no, I agree with that. But and I would even say that then obviously there's a whole bunch of things going into this, but I mean, one of the things that's included in my count of social kinds is that they represent a fairly stable property clusters that makes them perceptible. And so, that includes the kinds of things that they are, stable enough to be perceptible by biological entities. So, for instance, flower colors and insect pollinators, from the perspective of insect pollinators, flowers are a social kind because they have reasonably stable properties that they can make reasonably robust generalizations about how they're going to, be able to get nectar from them most of the time or something like that. So especially because I include classificatory mind dependence in my category of mind dependence. And so in that respect, and then in terms of the sciences, I'm very clear not to, I deny the unity of the sciences. So I don't think that there's a single unitary notion of science. And I definitely don't believe in a hierarchy of sciences such that, physics is the king and then everything else, falls down the wayside. But rather what I want to suggest is that, and I put this explicitly in the epistemology chapter, that we have, certain things that we have more or less evidence for, and some of those things cluster in some disciplines and not others, but it doesn't even define the line between natural and social sciences. For instance, Napoleon made himself emperor of France or something is a well-attested claim based on a vast amount of historical evidence, but is not scientific if you're going to use that word scientific to mean, I don't know, the way that most people in the Anglophone world use scientific. And admittedly, the Anglophone world is weird because in German and in French and in Spanish, the words science or Wissenschaft in German has more elasticity in it, and any kind of systematic knowledge. And so, historical sciences are, so that would be a historically robust claim that Napoleon is, was crowned emperor of a certain point. And there are things that cluster in the so-called natural sciences that are not robust generalizations, like string theory, for which we have no independent evidence, basically, and is mostly about a kind of prestige of science and the fact that it fits some mathematical models whose application to the world no one has been able to successfully demonstrate. And I would say also that's where and partially I want to say also that there are things in indigenous knowledge traditions that are well justified and just as well justified as things that are and have been arbitrarily excluded because of their association with indigenous knowledge traditions. And by following Boaventura de Sousa Santos, I want to argue that what we're aiming for is a cosmopolitan ecology of knowledges. I love that phrase of his, which is to say, what we want to prevent ourselves from doing is predetermined judgments about what is scientific and therefore real and true. And that may be also where I might be splitting with Bardon and Ferrari. I may not be. Anyway, we don't need to keep ventriloquizing them. Let's stop referencing them. I'm more curious what you or someone Dolan would think. But I want to say that's what I'm worried about, an overinflated notion of science that has, that runs roughshod over a whole bunch of other things and presumes that science is a unity, that there's one thing called the scientific method, which there's not, and that presumes that a whole bunch of things that are a mix of things that we have good evidence for, like anthropogenic climate change, and a mix of things that we have bad evidence for, like, as I said, string theory, and bundles them all together under some big name, scientia, knowledge or something, and then presumes that we fully know those. And partially, I think that both artificially inflates something that we as philosophers can be more sophisticated about, because we can work out a better epistemologies. And so we can then start to think about, what makes better or worse knowledge claims without getting caught up in this notion that science is a unitary way of accessing a real and that has all these implications to it, because frankly, science is much more of a mess. And especially if you do history of science, as I do with one of my other hats, you can see how on the ground it is all kinds of complicated and fraught and whatever, which doesn't mean we throw it all out. They're great and wondrous things that, but it means that we have to be humble toward it. And that's one of the other things that I want to suggest. Yeah.
I think that the Simondonian view of science would be more of a constructivist view of science, but not constructionist. The statement of is a social construction, and there's relative, or that is a statement that has not value. I think that that implication or these implications would be rejected altogether. But it's a kind of constructionist because it places techniques and technology in the center of production of knowledge. And techniques, it's not only a particle, ¿cómo se colisionador sería?
Colisionador de partículas. How do you say particle collisioner?
Particle collision?
Acceleration.
Yeah, okay.
Accelerator.
Accelerator, particle accelerator. I don't know, something. Yeah.
It's not only technology for creating knowledge. It's not only a particle accelerator. It will be archive, documents for addressing what you were saying about the non-scientific or the allegedly non-scientific character of history as a discipline. So I would think that will be the terms in which that view would be expressed.
Yeah.
And about.
But the thing is that how do you do philosophy from that spot?
From the spot.
So the distinction that Storm is trying to make here between social kinds and natural kinds is where social sciences would work. Would work. Yeah, not trying to attempt to those science with capital S, but instead of a science with lowercase instead. That's that distinction made by also Hassan. I don't know if he wrote about metamodernism as well. He's always quoted by Brendan Dempsey all the time. But yeah, so the thing is what the question I think in the background is how do we define the place where social sciences can put a step forward in front of the capitalist science? I don't know. Or how Simondonian should would be? What would we see that?
Well, the Simondonian view of science is kind of an activity. Well, there's a view of sciences in a first stage that would define stable structures.
Stable structures.
But there's kind of cybernetic view, a second phase, a complementary view on science that would define the operations. And psychology, I think it's similar in that sense to the distinction of natural kinds and social kinds, but reading of the natural label, there's structural kinds and operational kinds, so to speak. And for Simondon, psychology, sociology, I don't know, anthropology would be doing their activity will be defining operations more or less than stable structures. So I think that general point is sympathetic to what Jason was pointing out.
Okay.
And there's the silence. Well, I don't know. We can make another round.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Well, okay. The second point that Bardeen and Ferrari try to make would be about the benefits that the adoption of a Simondonian approach to biology and technology might bring for the Metamodernism project of grand synthesis. According to Bardeen and Ferrari, it's not surprising that modernism has led to the reduction of reality and knowledge to stable structures, because these structures are reproduced and perpetuated ontologically and epistemologically in the domain of politics. So it makes sense to them to look in ontology and epistemology for the birth of a new politics, as in your case, they think through the process social ontology. However, they propose that it will be better for this ontology, if not, as I said prior, if it's not only social, because through an alleged singularity of the human sciences, an exceptionality of the human being in nature could be reinstated. So they're not saying that you are doing this. It's more like you left the door open for others to do that. That's I think the critique, but I continue. In this sense, Bardeen and Ferrari point to Simondon as a fruitful reference for the Metamodernist project, insofar as he also proposes a new foundation of human sciences based on a vast reflection of the ontology and epistemology, not only of social sciences, but also natural sciences, establishing a continuity of process that will invalidate a radical distinction between natural kinds and social kinds, as we were commenting before, and helping, on the other hand, to think about politics scientifically or even technologically. In Simondon, it would be the operation of individuation, which is known by a technical operation that accompanies it, which would unite the different general theses that are also presented in the proposal of metamodernism. Meta-realism, which in Simondon would be the realism of relations, process social ontology, that would be, in Simondonian terms, collective individuation, semiotics, that I think it would be close to his intensive theory of information, reality-based normativity, that would translate as individuation inherent normativity, and synthetic epistemology, given the metastable nature of problems. Well, I extend the invitation from these authors to you to read Simondon, perhaps also Bardeen's book, which accentuates Simondon's political reading. I would tell you to read my book, but it's not translated to English, so.
Yeah, I can read Spanish, but so slow. I could read an article of yours in Spanish, but a book would take me too long. Yeah. But if you have an article, yeah, send it to me. I would love that.
It's hard. It's hard. The book is really dense.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I gave faith to that. I tried to go through it, and it's quite hard. It's quite hard. If you're not familiar with the terminology that you're using, if you don't know much about thermodynamics or electromagnetic stuff or hard sciences at some point, well, it's hard. It's hard.
In any case, and regarding the prior, what would be the place of techniques or technology in your project? Juan told me about something of a drone and a monkey.
Yeah, about in your chapter of semiotics, you talk about the about how a monkey or an ape would communicate to the rest of the apes when he sees a drone flying nearby, and how does it communicate that? He imitates it, he makes a growl, or I don't know. So there's
well,
that's the first thing that came to my mind when you're talking about semiotics and how technology or some kind of technology is involved in that kind of sense creating and sense consuming.
Yes. Okay. So a range of different things here that I'll try and respond. So I'd love to hear more, and maybe we can circle back to this, about what Simondon means by individuation, because that seems to be folks seem to think that that's central to his philosophical project, but he's using, obviously there's a use of that term in psychoanalytic context, but I don't know how he's using it or what he means by it. So anyway, that might be worth thinking about, but I can also just read it and maybe we can have a conversation again later. But
I can clarify.
Yeah.
I don't think that Simondon used the term individuation in the sense that Jung uses the term individuation. It's more the classic problem of individuation of scholastic thought, the came to be of an individual, or the operation of coming to be of the individual. The second sense, I think, it would be the more Simondonian.
And so in that context, Simondon is looking for politics that facilitates that process, or like how does that fit in connection to his technological scientific politics? Like what's the link between those two? That's not immediately obvious to me.
The link between all the project of Simondon would be that technology is the operation that enables us to follow the other operations of nature or of society, etc. And in relation with
like a catalyst or something.
Yeah, would be the point of
convergence of all the
and related to the question of the political side of Simondon, it's true that in his books, it's not the most prominent feature. You have to do some work of interpretation, but I think that in Simondonian terms, the politics or the politics desired would be a politics focus on education, well, knowledge and education, but
Yes.
incorporating that central place of technology in sense making and knowledge production.
Okay, so I would say in response to that, two things. So in the first case, in terms of education, I do definitely agree with the importance of a politics of education. I have an essay came out more recently than the Metamodernism book called Metamodernism as a Pedagogy of Revolution, where I'm using Paulo Freire as my departure point, but talking about how I'm responding to some other reviewers I'm in dialogue with, but basically putting the pedagogical stakes of it much more explicitly. Anyway, I'll send you that little bit. But in terms of technology, I think where I would follow or take my attitude toward technology as closer to the thinkers like, although I don't mean this in his dystopian way, but like Jacques Ellul or in certain respects Heidegger, insofar as I think of techniques as the priority, not technology. And I don't mean that I end up where Ellul does, because Ellul has a whole idea about how the technological society has stripped society of all its meaningfulness, and I don't think that that's true at all. But rather, I think what I do share with him and with Heidegger, as I read Heidegger, although it's more contentious than Heidegger studies, is that technology is itself an expression of something that is more fundamental than a particular artifact. The broader category is technics, of which the artifact is merely their physiological or materialized embodiment. And insofar as that's the case, my theory of social kinds is very explicitly geared toward artifact kinds. So, but with again, my de-anthropocentric view or anti-anthropocentric view that humans are not the only creatures that produce artifacts. So, although we're really good at it, but with two significant points. So in the first case, I want to say a large amount of my social kinds theory has been built on working out artifacts kinds. And I have one of the three kinds of anchoring processes I discuss. Organic anchoring is very much, which is, functionally directed anchoring processes come out of reading in the history of technological artifacts. So artifacts, for instance, tend to take their names from their initially intended function. So a hammer, why is it called a hammer? To hammer, to engage in an activity of repetitive action. And that what makes different hammers converge on certain kinds of properties, like the fact that, pretty much anywhere that there's a functional hammer, it's going to have a certain degree of rigidity. It's going to have a certain degree of tensile strength. It's going to be able to apply a certain pounds per square inch of pressure. That's because of that organic kind. So that's because of a particular set of anchoring processes. That's what makes them all hammers in a certain respect. But I'm also interested in hylosemiotics, the way that humans, artifacts are one version of social kinds. Some social kinds are physically instantiated in artifact forms, like a gun, but others are embodied in institutions. Others are embodied in repeated praxes or habits of behavior, like the assembly line, which is as much about getting people to move in certain ways as it is about things that are physically elaborated. We could go into Foucault and techniques of discipline. All of those are techniques in that respect, social kinds, in my account, organically anchored, functionally originated social kinds. But with a further twist on some theorists of technology, which is to say, I think humans not only produce artifacts, social kinds, but we're transformed by them. And we have been over the whole course of our history, even since before we were physiologically Homo sapiens. There's a lot of good evidence, for instance, that our distant ancestors' discovery of fire changed our metabolism and our consumption of products such that it allowed us to grow bigger brains, for instance. At least the case has been made. It's either fire or fermentation or some combination of both of those. So it's not the case and I think other critters, other sentient animals also have been transformed through social kinds practices. So we've also domesticated cattle, and that act of domestication has also transformed us, like those folks who can consume milk. I'm lactose intolerant, but I know a lot of people from a certain, So I want to say that we both produce artifacts and are transformed by those artifacts, and that there's not a hard line between technology and technique, that they blur into each other, and that social kinds, including technology, transforms us and transforms things like the way we exchange information, how we see ourselves, even our thinking processes. And this, when I'm trying to riff off of the mind turned inside out in the hylosemiotics chapter, I start to think about the way humans have, again, as long as we have archaeological evidence for this, have done some of our thinking by looping it through matter. So we had tally sticks are super old. So we mark, keeping track of numbers, or, I think by writing, like I'm clearer on the page than I am verbally, maybe, but it's because I'm thinking through that process, or part of my brain is externalizing, etc. So in that respect, I don't think that they're, all society. So unlike Alul, who thinks that technological society is a recent thing, I think that, there have been different technologies. And so the question is not, are you for and against technology, but we have to be much more specific. What are the transformatory effects of specific technologies, and what are their implications on the political and social order? So, television, for instance, might have been, and I think it was, really terrible for democratic politics, but that doesn't mean, but newsprint maybe was good for it. I don't know. But, it's not like a line between technology good or technology bad. It's like, what specific technologies, and how is it changing us, and how is it transforming our politics? And so new technologies allow new kinds of political formation, new, for instance, media of communication, allow new forms of the political. I think that's straightforwardly the case. And some of those are going to be good and some of those are going to be bad. And we have to, or we have to think our way through them at the very least. Yeah. Twitter gives us the Arab Spring, but it also gives us a whole bunch of terrible fascists too. So, it's hard to know, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the world is it's too complex to make these kinds of statements, definitive statements on where that thing is good or is bad in absolute terms. I remember some passage of Bataille that was talking about ¿cómo sería la carrera aeroespacial? Well, the competition that United States had with
to get to the moon. First was
with the Russians to the moon.
Yeah.
Well, and
space conquest.
And after, and shortly after too, as a kind of waste. No,
he was very interested in waste, a cursed share, and sacrifice.
All the investigations and findings that were made in that project, in that competition with the Russians, then more later became useful and fruitful. So against the idea of a waste, that it's kind of one of the central terms or notions of the political or impolitical thought of Bataille, but that what in what moment can be good or seen as good, and one in other moment can be seen as bad. Radio for propaganda or marketing communication, or you can it's not that technology is neutral in the sense that it has not some values, which it has, but it's neutral in the sense that you have an amount of a range of options that you can pull from. So, well, my question, it was not about if you see or the technology as good or bad. More of the place that have in your thought. I think I get the picture. It's more it's perhaps more central that it might seem. And well, I think that you would like Stigler for that.
I read
of exteriorization, interiorization. Of knowledge, and well, I think that you perhaps you didn't word it that way, but it's phenomenotechnic, as Bachelard said. So the production of knowledge is phenomenotechnic of production, or the production of artifacts that can be. Simondon points out that too, merely praxeological. Praxeology or praxis can be technical too. So the behavior that one tribe of monkeys learn from one another is also well, it's also an artifact. In ethology, talk about animal cultures. Well,
no, exactly, and I agree. And I read the first volume of Stigler's Techniques and Time, but and there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I agree with the gesture to Bachelard, and then I will add too that unlike some philosopher types, not the three of us, but some others who want to, I think that things like actual praxis has been hugely de-emphasized in philosophical circles. So there's a strong tendency by many philosophers to think that they can bracket out praxis and live only in the realm of ideas, and to produce categories that presume a harsh bifurcation between belief and praxis, or between intellection and praxis. And I think you and all three of us don't want to make that mistake. And it leads toward different things. We want philosophy to be taken to the street has to become a praxis, and more importantly too, if you want to look at the history of science, or maybe not more importantly, but equally importantly, if you look at the history of science and you think that science only operates at the level of the ideational, you're going to miss what most of the history of quote unquote science has been, which has been various praxis and various practices that have been, knowledge making or artifact making, etc. And so, yeah, exactly. So that's, I don't, so anyway, we can avoid a kind of, and I don't mean idealism in the broad philosophical sense, but in the lightweight social science sense. We don't want to be idealists in that way. We don't want to be idealists presuming that the what's happening in praxis or what's happening in the economic world is something that we can completely bracket out and just ignore. So no, I agree there.
So how much time we have? Because
I've got half an hour more.
Half an hour. Okay.
Thereabouts. I need to pick my daughter up at about 3:15 my time, so I have a little more than half an hour because she's only 5 minutes away. But
okay. So you finish your part and then I continue mine, or
as you want. I
Because
have a question.
yes.
I think I would do I would I would talk a bit after you.
After. Well, my questions are pretty simple. This I've been reading all through the way, as I told you before. I was reviewing your translation, and 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 I got some stuff from there because I come from a psychoanalytic branch of readings from especially Lacan, almost.
Yeah.
And I saw that there you mention it sometimes next to the figure of Derrida, and the notions you usually attribute to psychoanalysis is like I kind of symptomatic reading of texts. That's the way I think you sometimes put it. I don't know if it's that the thing, because I have a feeling while I was reading you that beneath all the heliosemiotics and social processes and stuff like that, I was thinking that maybe behind is not something like mesh up with psychoanalysis. There's no psychoanalysis at all. There's more cognitivism or conductual purpose. Yeah, there's something like behavioral psychology instead of and linked or bridged with philosophy of language instead of some cue readings from psychoanalysis that could I think improve even idiosemiotics or even process social ontology, because there's kind of an approach from psychoanalysis perspective that can enrich the vision. So the thing I was going to ask you is that how do you define, and this is the key thing, how do you define the when you talk about sign aspects, specifically the one you talk about in correlation, there's a subtype called symptoms. So how do you define that that term of symptom in your theory? Because you're talking about peers and how to actualize the theory of Peircean semiotics and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm doing like a very like super basic etymology right there, because obviously Simeon, and I don't remember exactly what I put in that paragraph, so I'll have to look at it. I think symptoms only comes up once, but Simeon, which we translate as it's the root of our semiotics, is from Hippocrates, right? The Greek physician. And so literally like a symptom is a sign. Like, or in Greek, it's the same word. Simeon is both. And so then I was trying to think about, and the sign types there are meant to be a continuum. They're not meant to be a harsh bifurcation. So different signs can be on a continuum in one way or the other. But I was starting to think about, different kinds of, in that section, correlational signs that are signs that, just trying to get us back to the beginning of early semiotics. And what did people like Hippocrates mean when they were talking about, we could translate it as either sign or symptom. And what I think what they were associating in particular, because it's in a context of medicine, was, and this is not a psychoanalytic context at all, well, that's messy because humans are, always psychoanalytic, everything's psychoanalytic. But just that like some certain biological entities have signs that are correlated with different kinds of biological processes. So, if I drink too much alcohol, I'll get a flush to my skin. And that is a sign too. And it's not a sign I'm consciously producing. This is the key thing. And it's correlational, because sometimes also I might flush for a different reason, right? So you can have different, that was what I was trying to do. Let me look at that paragraph again. Wait, or let me bring it up. But it was pretty minor. But what I'm interested in was just, just that little gesture for folks that I know the etymology. I don't know Greek. I have Latin, but not Greek. But I know enough to know that etymological connection, and was thinking about the way that symptoms function basically in medicine. And now I don't mean to overplay. I think you said disorder, and I don't mean that in a psychoanalytic sense. Maybe that is a mistake there. I maybe just mean the correlation between certain kinds of biological processes. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, because how do you, because I was thinking how that notion of symptom will include also the term, for example, lapsus linguae, or how did it acting out. Those are terms from
some psychoanalytic theory, yeah.
When we try to communicate, for example, and we don't understand what we are talking about, for example, as sometimes in English we don't know what is going on, but when you try to that kind of
so that's, I mean, because I'm partially also trying to distinguish between voluntary and involuntary signs, and note that often when we're reading is both. So unlike the theory of semiotics that thinks that there's, it's all about voluntary signs, what is usually called intentional signs. The only thing that you're communicating is what you intend to communicate. I want to say that there are a whole range of things that you're communicating that include things you don't intend or consciously intend to communicate, and that can include things like that. That can include my accent, which I don't mean to communicate, or if you can see if I haven't shaved, so I'm inadvertently communicating that I'm on just the beginning of summer break or whatever. But there are a range of things you can infer, and those things are not infinite. But unlike and they're signs that are capable of being interpreted by a particular sign consumer. They're not universal. So unlike folks like Paul Grice, who argue for what's called natural information, I want to argue that a sign takes its meaning only from the vantage of a particular consumer, and you can be wrong. So you can see me being flushed, think that I'm drunk, but actually it's wrong. I just had too much sun or something like that, right? So in that case, the flush did not in fact mean that I was drunk, but so you could be wrong about what you take something to mean, right? The same way you can think that the clouds mean rain and be wrong because it doesn't rain or whatever. So, and that different creatures can, because of our different perceptual affordances, can perceive different kinds of things. And I imagine somebody who's psychoanalytically trained can perceive features of my psyche that I don't mean to expose, or whatever. But you're right that I don't have but you're perceptive insofar as also I won't want to say behaviorist, but I mean I did I spent a bunch of time with Freud, but I haven't deeply done anything with psychoanalytic theory. I've done a little bit of Lacan, but mostly the bits of Lacan that were most relevant to subsequent French thinkers, the parts that are cited by Derrida, the parts that are especially cited by Foucault. I don't have training in psychoanalysis, and then I did do coursework in psychology and in cognitive science, and then in animal, I did a little thing on animal behavior. So it's true, there's a psychologistic rather than psychoanalytic background. I would say also the most about Lacan that I know is for Zizek, and I did read through Zizek, but Zizek's not a reliable interpreter of Lacan. He's always doing his own thing. So I'm sure that there are ways that psychoanalytic theory could provide things that I don't see. I 100% agree with that. And then it's up to you, but don't read symptom. No, but I think that, right. Yeah, you could read. Yeah, but anyway, but yeah, I mean, maybe something slightly different than that. And yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or the psychoanalytic notion of symptoms is compatible with what I'm saying, but my primary idea emerged from biology rather than the psychoanalytic context. Okay. But before I get too pigeonholed into behaviorism, I want to add one other thing. I'm also very critical of what I would call it, and I've called in an article that's coming out in a couple of months, the cybernetic account of rationality, which presumes a harsh bifurcation, a weird idea of rationality that presumes that humans are Bayesian calculating machines with ends means rationality, It's all, I want to argue, it's a homo academicus projected onto the mind. We're not calculating capitalist agents making rational choices in a particular way. We're, messier, fumblier, much more fraught, and in that respect, much more like, again, other kinds of sentient creatures that are a mix of, we're doing things based on a mix of conceptual processes that are transparent and oblique to us. So we are not always aware of our own decision making and thinking, and reflexivity. So so don't assume that I'm some kind of bad behavior, either that thinks the mind is a black box, or like certain kind of scientists that thinks that we're basically computers. Like we're not computers. So that's
Yeah, that's the way I was pointing to, because I was feeling like there's some like we are machines that behave and in some determined ways, and we can be just tracked and stuff like that. So there's a thing that you said right now in your article is going to be published in a few months, that it has to be with one of the questions, and it's that how we where's the place, how we how do you put it? So how do you what do you recommend? Where's the place for the one who makes theory inside of the theory, right? I think it's it's not only the theory that it has to be criticized, but also the theoretical person, because the person who's making the theory. And well, I feel like there's a kind of a not the critique of what it was wrote about, but how one is trying to solve inner issues or inner conflicts through the philosophy. So maybe there's that involuntary signs that you said before, maybe are dropped into a corpus or a conceptual working, right? So, or some politics or stuff like that. When you, for example, there's a common view of on Hegel's writing that says that he was a liberal and stuff like that. So the thing is that that maybe there's you talk about that in the beginning of your book, telling that there's some ghostly figures that haunts the academics or teachers when they write their essays, or they write their stuff, or they teach in classrooms, right? So I think there's a not a pedagogy, but a therapeutic way of dealing with philosophy as well, that I see in your writings, that it has to be with synthetic knowledge and how we treat ourselves in front of knowledge, and what is what knowledge says about us, instead of what are we trying to drop off of people, right? I don't know if you understand what.
Yeah, I think so, and I think I have an answer to it in 3 different ways. Although one of them hopefully will catch what you're asking, or maybe all of them in different pieces. In the first case, or maybe it's really 2 different things. In the first case, I think we should rightly be suspicious of those theorists that try and pretend that they speak from a God's eye view outside the thing that they're articulating or describing. And in that respect, the best kind of, but the answer to that is not to not do theory, but to actually, I want to argue, do a theory that captures you within the world of your own theorizing. So, so metamodernism is a theory that applies to itself, as I articulated. And the social kinds theory is itself a social kind, for instance. And so I'm trying to build that recursion in to that project from the beginning. And one aspect of that too, and here I'm drawing on the feminist thinker Sandra Harding and her notion of strong objectivity, the way that you, and I don't like the word objectivity, so I didn't make it pop up in the book particularly, but she argues, I think there's something right about this. She argues that the way that a community becomes a more objective community is not by pretending that it inhabits the God's eye view or completely neutral view, but by having individual actors, each with their own standpoints, and then but involved in a collective project so that they each help cancel out each other and then amplify each other in different ways. And so it's, I put it in the Metamodernism book, a God's eye view is not from above, but from many eyes or something. That was me trying to channel her in some way or another. But she's, talking about feminist standpoint there. What she's arguing is not that everybody needs to be feminist. That's a misreading. What she says is, yeah, you need some feminist theorists, you need some theorists from different backgrounds. And then the idea is that the feminist theorists will focus on area X, and then somebody from a different background focus on area on area Y, and then together we just have enough trust and let the other criticize us for the things that we are implicitly assuming, and then together she wants to say, having people from a multiplicity of backgrounds as part of science, that's her, her version of science, is part of how objectivity is produced, not pretending that nobody has any standpoint, nor is it denying the standpoint from which you originate. So that's why I'm very careful also in the book to talk about where I set out from, and who I am, what my deal is, and then also to bring other people in on the project, and it'll become better the more different views come into it, and then certain things will change necessarily, because of different participants. And again, I don't like the word objectivity because it's caught in a bunch of bad ideological disputes in the contemporary academy as a word. But I think that aspiration, the other way we can put it is, it's the better way to achieve something more like the virtues of value neutrality, and I say this also in the book, is not to have people hide their values, but to have people be explicit by their values, even as we make a good faith effort, not to distort our evidence in the sake of predetermined values, but we have our values and we don't try to hide them, but we also are opening ourselves up to criticism and allow ourselves to criticize each other and then work toward it. So this becomes, the other way that I've talked about it is, it's agonism, but not antagonism. So we argue with each other. We're just not trying to kill each other over it, or whatever. The second piece about where I thought you might be going, and I think this is also true, is that I thought of the book as a kind of philosophical therapeutics, both for me and for the reader. And this is only, now, my departure point was not Lacan here, but Wittgenstein. But Wittgenstein also has has that psychoanalytical register to him, and I think the difference is that. So on the one hand, Wittgenstein thought that he was late Wittgenstein thought that he was curing philosophy from its hangups and returning it to the common sense. But I want to suggest that the common sense and philosophy, we all have hangups. It's not the case that one is more or less hung up, but that I also wanted this book to function as a therapeutic exercise. So if you read it from the beginning to end and then reread it again, that was my work. I was going through that work in a set of phases, starting with the postmodern stuff, grappling with it, then working my way out the other side, but then starting over again. And I think that this also, I hope, makes clear one of the things that I think is important about the book which is that I think we need the negative moment. It's just that we need to start with, but not end with, the negative moment. So unlike some anti-postmodernists, or whatever your preferred term is, anti-skeptics, who want to say, oh, let's just throw all that out and just be all upbeat or whatever. No. We start from the way that the present moment is fucked up. And we start from the way that there have been these various failures, both ethically and epistemologically and what have you. We start from the critique of language, all these things. It's just we don't end with them. And then I think if you do this as a philosophical therapeutics, it teaches you, to put it in vulgar terms, you deconstruct your own concepts first, and then you work through, and then you do a reconstructive move But even then, that's not the end, because eventually you'll have to do the deconstructive step yet again. It's eventually, to some extent, too. It's just that then you spend a time doing a lot of building first, and I think that that's net positive. So it's not something that ever ends in that respect, but it allows us to produce humble knowledge and concepts that we hold on to fragilely or carefully, rather than re-reifying them or producing, either in the outdated modernism or in the or the outdated Enlightenment universalism. But we also don't cling or stop in the negative moment, which is what I associate with postmodernism. So again, this becomes postmodernism as preparation, but it's a preparation that I think we need. It's still valuable to us, if only as a kind of therapy for philosophical preoccupations, and also for ordinary folk who've maybe never even had philosophy. I think it can be useful to work through some of that deconstructive, to do that kind of deconstructive work at a particular register, because that level almost didn't reach certain sectors of society. So, based on people's attempts to preserve certain spheres as untouchable or what have you. So again, critique, the other way to put it is, I'm not anti-critique. I'm pro-critique, I think, but I think critique needs to be a starting point, not an ending point. So we start with critique and then we go on. Yeah.
Is in a sense of reconstruction instead of all the time deconstruction, or nihilizing everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the claim of transparency also needs as well going through some therapy for oneself as a theorist as well, because you have to at some point be clear of what, not define what you want at the end, because that's really hard at some point, but trying to I don't know, acknowledge the place of enunciation you are trying to express through various workshops or various writings you throw out at the end. But totally. I try to do that the same. In the book I'm writing about the introduction to Metamodernism, which I don't have still the title, but I'm working on it. Yeah, and
I threw a citation towards you. I don't know if you caught this, but
I read it. Yeah.
In the thing that I just posted yesterday or whatever it was. Did you see that? Yeah.
No, I saw the email. I didn't know that you.
Oh yeah, no. I just published in. I'll send you the link. But I was writing a piece for a Mufta magazine, which is a political. Basically, they historically had been doing Middle East politics, but they're trying to pivot toward doing more global politics and thought, basically, more broadly. And they, in their reboot, they've added the word they wanted to add the word metamodern into their mission, and I'm really flattered. And they asked me to contribute, tell them what metamodernism is. Anyway, I'll send you a link to the article. I tried to write a version of my project. They said, like, only 1 or 2 footnotes are okay. And they're like, which is really hard. And then
you don't know who you're talking to.
Yeah. So yeah, right. So I tried to give a version of it for that audience, but then I wanted to at least refer to at least 1 or 2 works that summarize what metamodernism is. I attributed to you that title, the title that you sent me, and put it in the footnote. And then I put Brendan's book in the other book in the footnote, because which he gave me a copy of, but I haven't fully read yet. So. But anyway, I thought there are not that many good things at this point that are synthesized, that are trying to do synthetic stuff across different versions of metamodernism. So
I went through all of the Brancy, Dipsy book a few months ago, and it was kind of it's well compiled, but it's way too reductive, I think. It's like it's a pretty good introduction to what metamodernism is, like a culture of cultures. He says something like that, a critique of culture from the culture of cultures or something like that. But anyway, so
here's the Mufta piece that take a look at that. I put that in the chat line.
Okay.
Yeah, and I like Brendan's work a lot, but it's true, he's not a philosopher. He's he's coming at it from more culture, religious studies, culture direction. And so there's a lot of nuanced stuff. anyway, and he's got his own take, and he, but he's a great guy, and I really appreciate. He's really interested in kind of bridging the different strands. I've described him as, as a kind of, peacemaker. He wants to take all the different camps and make everybody agree, and that produces its own compensations in one way or another. But I love that peacemaking effort for sure. Yeah.
So kind of a Hansi Freinacht view as well, like an integrator.
Yeah, and he's really into the Hansi Freinacht crowd. Yeah, he's more
right?
He's closer to that than I am. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But
well, it's
it is time.
Did you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
I have 15 more minutes if you want.
15 more minutes.
And then I should go. Yeah, I can go till 3 my time.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to.
Or we could stop too. It just depends. Yeah, whatever you.
Up to you.
Yeah, your energy levels. You're the ones who I'm exhausting by speaking out in English. So pardone. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean to revive my Spanish, but it's been too long, and I've been lately. The project I'm working on is in Japanese, so I've been on my Japanese stuff for the last little part of my brain for the last couple of weeks. So it's like I can only I need to do a thing where I keep languages current, but I don't. I just tend to do them, then for a project, and then I drop it, and then I count on my ability to recover them, but it takes a little while, and then I fumble back, and then it clicks, but it takes a few weeks, and then it falls away again. So.
It requires a continuous practice.
Yeah.
If you don't practice the language,
it fades.
Yeah. I think it's kind of what happens to us. Normally, we don't speak in English with nobody. So, when we have to change language in the settings.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah,
it's quite difficult.
So yeah, if you want to, we can wrap it up, and then.
Well, I have one more question.
Okay.
Regarding what you were saying about that kind of effort of synthesis or peacemaking, as you were putting it. Do you embrace or do you embrace that notion or idea of paradigm? So, I mean, did you see? Do you see metamodernism as a paradigm in that Kuhnian sense? Because I think that is quite simplistic. I'm more of a Feyerabend guy than Kuhnian guy.
Yeah, epistemological anarchy. Yeah.
I think he makes great critiques to the notion of paradigm because there's no such thing of normal sciences. There's a lot of in philosophy, there's a lot of schools, topics that even don't overlap. So that notion of paradigm or train that all the philosophers would jump, it seems to me like I don't know, like a strange idea. I don't know.
I think you pinpointed where I disagree with in terms of Kuhn, but I still use the notion of paradigm, and I use it in a different, slightly restricted sense. So here, so let me take a step back. I'm following here Larry Loudon. Have you come across him? He's another post-Kuhnian philosopher of science, but and not just him, but one of this, so I do think that there are paradigms, but or you could call them research traditions, but with a couple with two different key features. One, paradigms are not universal, and I'm much opposed to even people like Foucault, for instance, who talk about episteme as though they are like huge, grand, universal things. Those are even harder to find any evidence for, and I don't think that they're very plausible. I think that so I don't think that paradigms are universal, and I also don't even think, even within an academic discipline, I think this is where Kuhn made a mistake. I don't think that there's ever a unitary paradigm that is operative within a particular academic discipline. Or is rarely the case that there is only a single paradigm. I do think that there are paradigms in some respects in the way that Kuhn articulated them, models, basically. And the metamodernism paradigm, especially in the classical sense, which is to say, not as a rigid worldview, but as a set of models, standards, and intellectual habits that determine the dialogue and conversation within a particular field. You could call it a research tradition, or you could call it a paradigm, but I think that I prefer paradigm. But there's another place that I disagree with Kuhn, and I put this actually in the Metamodernism text. I think that you can translate across paradigms. And I think that, in fact, Kuhn himself does it when he's trying to talk about how, not to be clear, not that you can produce, and here's where I agree with Verhaben, that you can stand outside from some neutral and objective distance, but merely that even within paradigms, that translation happens. Part of the way that a new paradigm takes hold is often to translate. And Kuhn himself translates Aristotelian physics into Newtonian physics in the essay where he says that paradigms are untranslatable and all this other stuff. So there's a mess around that. So I think you can translate between paradigms. Paradigms are not the same thing as worldviews. There are multiple paradigms at operation in a given discipline. And in metamodernism, I'm not trying to describe a zeitgeist level episteme, but I'm trying to produce a paradigm shift within the humanities and social sciences by providing a new model about how scholarship could go going forward. And I do think that that is different than the model that was handed to me. And I call the model that was handed to me in graduate school postmodernism because for various historical reasons, but I don't even want to say that even within my graduate training, it was the only model, but it was the dominant one. And I then also follow Kuhn in noting that, and he says this in a throwaway, but I think it's very significant, that often paradigms are embodied in things like textbooks. And so,
it's one of the I don't know, 32 meanings of the word.
Paradigm. Yeah, because he's getting from language studies, right? So, and so in that respect, anyway, so I do think that postmodernism, not as a zeitgeist, but as what I'm using to describe a very specific academic paradigm, primarily a product of the Anglophone Academy in the decades from, let's say, the 1980s through the early 2000s, was dominant. And now, because it provided a model for what research was supposed to look like, and it provided default answers to a set of philosophical questions that people then didn't have to think about because they were getting it from this. So instead of thinking, what is meaning? Scholars in the human sciences were often confronted with problems of interpretation. They just inherited it from textbooks that gave them a superficial Saussurean language theory, and then people kind of went with it. It turned out to, they didn't do it fully consistently and all these things. But I think I also agree with your reticence about the difference between normal science, Kuhn, and revolutionary. Yeah, I mean, that's a distinction that Kuhn overplays. And there are debates around whether, it's messier and more complicated terrain than that. It's more like certain slow change or sudden change, not normal versus revolutionary. Because social kinds theory, these are process kinds anyway. So it's just what we think of as a revolution is just a fast processual change, and what we think about as even normal science isn't stasis; it's just slower change. So at least that's the way my theory would suggest. Yeah.
Verhaben points out that it's not only a question of rapid change or abrupt change. It's that in scientific activity. There's a lot of frameworks and opposed interpretations. So
for sure,
there's never one paradigm.
I agree.
I think that's what makes prone to error the notion of paradigm. even the notion of paradigms shift, because it points out to a kind of periodicity, or I don't know, order of well, that we have the Aristotelian physics. After we have the Newtonian physics, now we have the Einsteinian physics. And in physics, well, there's the theory of relativity, but there's a lot of frameworks and problem-solving traditions inside that.
No, I completely agree. And so you have even what is normally accorded one paradigm or one research tradition tends to have certain things left unresolved and certain inherent tensions. One, two, old paradigms don't just die, because also, we still have Aristotelian. We had Aristotelians, up until quite late. For instance, they just, it's relative priority within the academy, not complete shift. And the other key point is that most of this discourse seems to completely ignore praxis. And you have praxis shifts and technological shifts that are often even more determinate. So, it's why the idea that, chemistry isn't the revolution against alchemy that it portrays itself to be for a long period of time, longer, even after Lavoisier, changes all the terminology. They're still doing most of the same things that alchemists were doing for another 100 years. So, eventually the praxis changes, but it's like, but the moment of rupture, in many terms, is not the new Lavoisier's new terminology, although that is ruptural in certain contexts, but or produces changes that take a while to unfold, but actually the arrival of new institutional structures and new methodologies and techniques that take much longer to come into play. So all those things I think are bundled together. But I would say in the so there's a lot at stake. But I do find the use of paradigm useful insofar as I think that there are certain kinds of research traditions and certain kinds of models that are taught within disciplines and that take dominance in certain disciplines, even if they never take full hegemony, and that they're often covertly related to praxis. And sometimes the praxis is either more or less contiguous.
That's it. Yeah, for my part, that's all.
That's all. So well, we shut it down because it's almost 9 here, and it's really late for us.
That's great. Thank you. I'll so I should stop the recording so I can okay.
Okay.
And then I'll send you a link. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.